Good morning. This is Mr. McMurray, and it's a bright Sunday morning, although you'll be seeing this on a bright Monday morning. All right, we're going to hit our digestive system notes. All right, starting with what we already covered, we talked about the alimentary canal, which is the fancy name for the tube that food passes, going from your mouth all the way through your stomach, intestines, and eventually to the anus. All right, the path is also called gastrointestinal, or GI tract for short. Stomach and intestines being the two main parts. Gastro means stomach, intestinal obviously has two intestines. And so this is basically the GI tract, okay? Now you have accessory digestive organs, which are not part of the tube or they're inside the tube, but they have their own part to do. Your teeth, your tongue, salivary glands, all in your mouth, pancreas, your liver, and your gallbladder would be examples of some of these accessory organs, okay? Now, start with mouth and throat. The teeth, obviously cut and grind teeth. Food, you have your incisors and your fangs that help to cut or tear at food. Okay, that's why dogs and cats have these fangs, predators, because they have to tear meat off the bone. But then you have your molars, which are your back teeth, and they are more just for grinding it up. All right. Your tongue, very important to food, mixes the food together along with the saliva that your body secretes. Okay, amylase is an important ingredient. It is a enzyme that breaks down the starch in the foods that you're eating and breaks them down back into sugar. All right, the other thing that the tongue does is it forms a bolus. All right, bolus just means like ball and a nice clump that you can swallow all at once. You push your tongue against the roof of your mouth and it pushes the bolus back behind, which allows you to swallow it easily. And of course, there's also taste buds. Your taste buds are on your tongue. There are different salt, sweet, savory, and there are various different tastes that you have that you can pick up on your tongue, but they're basically spread all throughout. I've seen labs and heard people say, oh, there's one area that's for sweet, and there may be some areas of your tongue that have more of one taste bud than the other, but basically they're all mixed together. Just for the record, you also have some taste bud type receptors in your throat and stomach and other places that you wouldn't think. Fortunately, they do not send taste information, but apparently they do monitor the situation and send information back. All right, your pharynx is the back of your throat, okay, where your mouth cavity and your nasal cavity from your nose meet and overlap. Okay, well, since it meets there, you're going to have air that you're breathing. You're also going to have food going down, and after the pharynx, it's going to have to decide where to go. It's either going to go down the trachea, which is your breathing tube, to your lungs, or it's going to go down the esophagus, which connects to your mouth, to your stomach. Now, keep in mind, it is a collapsible tube that does not stay open all the time. So your esophagus doesn't need to be open because, unlike your glottis, trachea, which goes to your lungs, it has to stay open all the time. But your esophagus is a very soft, collapsible tube made out of tissue there. All right, to look at this a little closer, here's your tongue. You can see how it pushes up here, pushes food back, makes the food into a nice round ball, and then push it back. Now, when it comes back here, you can see this is the epiglottis, a little flap over it. Here's the glottis, or opening. If you're swallowing food, this flap comes down, shuts off the trachea, and forces the food to go back here into the esophagus. All right. So if you laugh or something, though, in the middle of eating, sometimes that'll pop this back up as you make noise or sound and laugh, and so stuff will literally go down the wrong tube. And if it goes down to your lungs, then you will immediately begin coughing, trying to get it back up out of there. Okay, not recommended. Just for the record, the uvula back here goes up when you swallow and pushes up against your nasal cavity right here, so that things don't go back up your nose. Sometimes when you snort milk out of your nose, it's usually kind of painful, but it can go back the wrong direction also. All right. All right. Now, let's get to the stomach. All right. The stomach gets all the credit for digestion, which is really probably not fair, because it's just a big muscle-bound storage tank for the most part, and mixing storage and mixing tank. Think of it that way. All right, so it's not important. It's just it doesn't really do as much of the digesting as it usually gets credit for. All right, at the top you have the cardiac sphincter, usually right around the diaphragm. Let's see what the wrong thing is. There we go. Okay, and the pyloric sphincter is up here. Okay, and this, cardiac sphincter. Sorry, up here. It's the diaphragm right here. So this esophagus right here is right behind the heart. So what happens is, if this does not keep the acid stuff from going back up. If it goes back up, it begins to burn the tissue on the inside of the esophagus, and you have heartburn. It's not actually having anything to do with your heart. It's just right behind your heart, and so that's why it was called heartburn. But that is the cardiac sphincter, and that's why it's called cardiac, because it's up near the heart. Okay, and so that its job is to keep stuff from going back down. Now we also have heartburn or acid reflux. That means it's allowing stuff to go back up. All right. Other information, real quickly, your stomach is about 6 to 10 inches long. That's not real big, okay? It's about that big normally. That's if it's empty. And it can hold up to about a gallon of stuff. It can stretch, so it stretches a bunch. And this has a lot to do. There's little receptors in it that tell you when you're full or not. Why? Because it's stretching. And when it stretches to a certain point, it tells you you're full. A lot of times people recommend if you drink water before you eat your meal, you'll eat less because your stomach will send you these full messages sooner. So one of the important reasons to drink water is that it will keep you from overeating. As you get at my age, that can be more important and more of an issue. All right. It has several types of muscles, circular muscles that go around and squeeze it together. It has longitudinal muscles that squeeze it this way. It also has diagonal muscles or oblique muscles that help churn the food and mix it and stuff like that. And so keep that in mind, okay? And it mixes with all the food together. Since it can squeeze it about 3 different ways, it mixes it up together real good and causes it to get all really mixed up with what we call the gastric juices. We talk about stomach acid, but it's not just stomach acid. There are other things in it. And so the gastric juices, which are hydrochloric acid, which is the stomach acid. You have pepsin, which is a chemical that kind of pre-treats your proteins and starts breaking them down a little bit, kind of like the amylase in your salivary glands helps break down the starch a little bit. And something called intrinsic factor, or B12. And this is a very important thing because it allows you to absorb vitamin D and some of your other vitamins. So it's very important that you have this vitamin B12, or intrinsic factor, in your stomach. All right. So basically, its job is just to churn up all the food into a big slurry, and that when it leaves the stomach, most of your food should be very liquidy. It's called chyme. C-H-Y-M-E, chyme, and it's a very creamy looking, slurry, messy stuff. That's why if you throw stuff up, it's mostly liquid unless there's some chunks that haven't got broken down much yet, okay? Now, the chyme sits in there, and a little bit at a time will be let out through the bottom here, which is the pyloric sphincter, okay? So the pyloric sphincter is like a gatekeeper. It controls when the food is ready to leave, okay? So if it's still too chunky and whatever, nope, not ready yet, okay, it will let a little bit of it go out. Okay, and notice the way the stomach is squished here. It opens up a little bit, it lets a little bit slide out and move down into the duodenum, into the small intestine. Okay, and then it closes back up. Then it lets a little bit more go back through it. And just a little bit at a time, it lets it go down there. For the record, most food spends about 4 to 6 hours in the stomach before it's actually allowed to leave. So it takes a little while for this to work, a very slow process. So this stores it and then lets a little bit go down into the duodenum and be digested at any given time. All right, now let's talk about the gallbladder, because as this goes into the small intestine, we're going to have a little bit to talk about that. Okay, the gallbladder, remember, is underneath the liver. Okay, up underneath the liver, and has a little tube coming out, which is the bile duct. Okay, it collects bile. We call it bile, but there's a bunch of what we call bile salts, and there's bilirubin and other breakdown products from blood vessel, red blood cells and stuff that have been that have been removed from the blood and taken out of the stuff. Okay, now in the gallbladder, it takes out a lot of the water from this and concentrates it. Okay, and unfortunately, one of the things that can happen if it forms cholesterol in there, and the cholesterol can make what we call gallstones, little hard rock-like looking materials. Okay, these solid gallstones can block up the bile duct, okay, which is not good. Okay, but we're going to get to that on the next slide. So let me use, oh, there we go. All right, if it gets blocked, that causes that bilirubin, which normally would be going down in here to digest your fat, to go back in the bloodstream, and that's going to cause you to turn yellow, and you have jaundice. Okay, remember, jaundice is yellow, and that's when this bilirubin and bile and stuff that would normally be leaving through the gallbladder starts backing up into your blood, and you get that yellow color. Newborns often have trouble; their livers haven't quite kicked in yet, and so they'd be jaundice, and they put them in little incubators with a heat light on them, and they get stuff out that way. Okay, so that's what gallstones can cause. All right, just a quick look at the stomach. You can see the muscles here. There's muscles that go more circular, more they're diagonal. These are long, and so they can squeeze it in a bunch of different ways to help churn the food and get it all together. And go through the pyloric sphincter, and we'll go down into the duodenum, which is where the rest of the digestion is going to take place. All right, now when food gets to the duodenum, it sends a little message, and then it relays a chemical message, and it goes up to the gallbladder and tells it to contract. Okay, and it sends this bile into the duodenum, all right, where it emulsifies the fat. Okay, what does that mean? Well, an emulsifier is something that we know fat and water do not mix. Okay, but for example, in say mayonnaise, you have fats and you have water. Milk is the same way. You've got fat and you've got water mixed together. Emulsifiers allow them to mix and become compatible. So what the bile does, it allows the fat to be mixed with the water, break down into smaller pieces, and it also allows it to be vitamins that are what we call fat soluble to be absorbed. Okay, so this is very important. The bile allows us, one, to break down fats, and it also allows fat-soluble vitamins to be absorbed into the body. And so the bile is very important. If someone gets their gallbladder removed, they can survive, but since it's not storing it up and squeezing a whole bunch of it in there at once when the fatty food is in there, it just kind of drips out a little bit at a time, and so they may or may not be able to digest properly all the fat, and so they generally tell them to avoid fatty foods. All right. Pancreas also kicks in about this time. The pancreas sends stuff over to the duodenum also and secretes what we call pancreatic juices. Okay, and these pancreatic juices help digest the protein, the fats, the nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and just basically all the nutrients. And this is the stuff that really does the digesting. So it just happens a little bit at a time in the duodenum. All right. Now, the pancreatic juices are also important, though, because remember, this stuff is coming from the stomach. Well, it's very low pH, very high acid content, okay? And so the pancreatic juices are alkaline, and this says lower the acidic pH. It should be raise, okay? That is a mistake. It should raise the acidic pH and cause it to be more neutral, and so it doesn't damage the rest of the intestines and stuff. You don't want all this acidic stuff from the stomach going through there and doing damage to the tissue there. So these alkaline or basic pancreatic juices allow us to change the pH. All right, so they're important for that reason as well. All right, now. Pancreas, we'll see if we can get all this in the pancreas or not, secretes insulin when you're hyperglycemic. Hyper means there is too much sugar, glycogen, glucose, all those words have to do with sugar, so it's too much sugar in your blood. And that can cause some very serious problems, going into a coma, stuff like that. So your pancreas secretes insulin, and insulin lowers. It takes the sugar out of the blood. Either cells take it up, your liver takes it up, several different things it does to do it, but it gets it out of your bloodstream. Okay. Now, if you have diabetes, type 1 diabetes is where your body does not make insulin, and therefore you can't send this signal to say, hey, let's get all that blood out of, or sugar out of the blood. Okay. And so those are people who will take insulin shots, and now they've gotten different little meters that can measure that and pump it in, but that is how they treat their disease. Now, what is more of a problem in the United States is we're coming up with what we call type 2 diabetes. And this is diabetes that does not respond to insulin. In other words, their body makes insulin, but it doesn't start taking the sugar out of the blood like it's supposed to. Unfortunately, you can't give these people more insulin because they're just going to ignore that insulin just like they ignore the insulin that your body already makes. So really about the only way to control this, there are again some medications that help, but the best way is to watch what you eat. Don't eat high sugar meals and stuff. There's different things they think that cause this, but probably a lot of it is we eat so much more sugar than we would have been exposed to, say, 100 or 200 years ago, when sugar was not such a common ingredient. If you just had an occasional piece of fruit or something like that. And so our body gets resistant to insulin or insulin resistance. All right? We will take up more of this on the